We were talking earlier about the extending the 2017 tax cuts and how much that's going to cost. And, one thing that has come up during the campaign is President elect Trump has talked about the need for and the desirability of imposing tariffs. He's talked about a 10 or 20% across the board tariff, 60% or more tariff on China. It's possible a couple things could happen. I mean, one, the tariffs could be included in reconciliation as a partial offset for the other tax cuts. But the other thing that's interesting is Congress historically has given the president broad authority to adjust tariffs basically on his own. There's certain laws that require a presidential finding of an emergency, or it requires, for example, the International Trade Commission to find that there's been some harm to a domestic industry before you can impose the tariffs. But that raises the question, is it preferable that Congress enact the tariffs in the law as part of reconciliation, or is Congress going to cede that authority to Trump and essentially let him do what he will under existing authority to raise tariffs? Is there a view as to which is preferable?
Well, my sense is that President Trump has very strong views about tariffs and has made campaign pledges to that effect. And he has not generally shown significant deference to the legislative branch. He tweeted last week something to the effect that he expects that his cabinet appointees will be recess appointees and that the Senate will go along with that. And so to that point, I find it hard to imagine that President Trump would wait for Congress to increase tariffs. The other thing, though, is I expect that that some of these tariff pledges are somewhat of a negotiating ploy, and that 50% tariff on Chinese goods would have really detrimental consequences for the U.S. economy, as would the 20% tariff. So I'm sure both those numbers will go down. But I guess to the specific question you're asking, Steve, I just find it hard to believe that he's going to wait for Congress to act.
Yeah, I think a good question, Steve. And I got a lot of thoughts on this. First of all, I think your listeners, Bob, need to know that the tariffs collected over the next 10 years, current tariffs, is less than $900 billion. That's 1% of the total revenues that we collect over this period. So first of all, this is that's the current, and even if you were to raise the tariffs, you're not going to come anywhere near the 4 trillion or 7 trillion in tax cuts that we're talking about. Second thing is, I've been told many times, and Tom, I don't know about the House, but Steve, and my experience here is the last thing Congress wants to do is be involved in setting what those tariffs are. Because think about it, it's the regional issues, it's the commodity issues. There's so much division that's created when you start trying to set what those tariffs are. So that is why I think the existing law allows the U.S. Trade Representative, in this case it'll probably be Lighthizer again, to set that through executive action. Now, to my point, if they're set through executive action as a budget, as Tom and you know, then that's not scorable in the baseline that's already on the Hill. So the only way you can get, if he were to implement any of these tariffs, the only way to have that scored is in reconciliation to offset some of the tax cuts, would be to have Congress direct CBO to score those tariffs as offsets. Directed scorekeeping, we're getting into the weeds here, is a 60-vote point of order. So I think there are real issues associated with how, first of all, I don't think this is good policy. And to Tom's point, I wonder what is the book, The Art of the Deal? This may just be a bluff to try to get negotiation. So I can't believe that we're talking about that level. The inflationary impact would be so devastating. So I think that this is one that they got to be careful about using this as an offset for their tax cuts that might be coming forward.
I just like to add to what Bill just said, that these tariffs, in addition to being inflationary, are, really, economists will tell you quite clearly that they are tax increases. And Congress is not generally inclined to vote to raise taxes, especially if it's on a partisan basis. And also, I just think we ought to consider, in addition to the inflationary impact of these tariffs, more broadly, if the Trump plan were put into effect, that it would represent a tax increase of about 4 and almost 5% tax increase on people for the bottom 20% on income level. 5% tax increase. Middle income people would also get a tax increase, and people at the very top would get about a 1% tax cut.